I'm going to be reaching out to my prospects, on day 1 and then on day 3 and day 10. And the reason behind it is because, that's how I feel like they're going to be answering the phones, etc. There's a lot of methodology behind it. I'm going to be diving into numbers regarding cadences and what works and what doesn't. So that's coming up. But that is generally what a cadence is. Now, the other important part, sorry, my clicker is just, okay. The other important part with the cadence is also the messaging. So coupling the cadence, which is the strategy of when and how you're going to be reaching a prospect, with the right pain points and areas that the prospect cares about, is how you're actually going to get the reply that you want, which is, yes, book me in for a demo. So typical channels that we're using in a cadence, there's tons of channels out there. I personally like to use all of them. We found out at GrowthEngine that we get 30% more meeting booked rate by using all 3 channels together, which I'm going to be touching on a little bit later on today. But there's basically cold calling, which I get all the time, people saying that it doesn't work. Cold calling is a great weapon if you know how to do it. It is probably one of your key tactics to get people actually to book in a meeting with you, because you get to chat to them. Then there is the email outreach, which is probably a little bit more known methodology. And then lastly, there is the social selling, which is constantly growing. I mean, LinkedIn is one channel, but there's also Instagram and TikTok that can be used in social selling as well. And there's a couple of methodologies around that. So the first thing that you really want to do when you think about your outbound strategy is to move the needle in order to get a yes. And in order to get a yes, you need to craft your messaging very carefully to what actually speaks to your prospect's pain point. You need to start off by thinking, what is my prospects thinking about? What is keeping them up at night? What do they care about in their specific role, in the way they are based in the company, in their responsibilities? In B2B sales, there's 3 main pain points that we usually touch on. The first one is to increase revenue. The second one is to reduce expenses. And the third one is to mitigate risks. Your prospect directly or indirectly cares about one of those 3. And your job is to understand how they care about it and what do they frame it in terms of language when you're crafting the message, because that's what's going to get them to respond to you. Now, in order to do that effectively, you need to define your persona. So essentially, you need to look at your target market as a group of many, many people that have different pain points and needs. And by grouping them into sub-segments that actually have similar pain points and similar aspirations, you will get better messaging. So, and you want to get actually really, really particular about how you define these. So you can break it down into title, into the type of company they are, how much revenue the company is making, the type of pain points that they're experiencing. You want to get as detailed as you can into developing a niche, and then catering your cadence messaging into that niche, and creating a cadence for every niche that you do have. Now, one of the things that I see most people getting wrong with outbound is that they're being very vague. So, we spoke about the fact that most people want to generate higher ROI, either through, increasing revenue, reducing expenses, and that's great. So a lot of the messages that I see out there is like, oh, I'm gonna help you get an ROI. Okay, but how are you going to get me that ROI? Essentially, different people look at ways in which you can generate them ROI differently, and that's what they want to hear. And you need to get it in front of them very concisely, how you're gonna help them improve that ROI in your messaging. So when you're crafting your cadence messaging, you want to pay particular attention into your how sentence. So a couple of examples here. I've just put it like, a random number, 400% ROI increase. But how am I going to do that? So implementing an AI tech that helps recognize duplicating tasks. I mean, that's just one example. But to the right person, that's going to make sense and resonate with them, and that's what's going to trigger them to want to know more. So when it comes to cadences, there's actually 3 types of cadences that we use, and they have proven to be successful in quite a few countries for quite a few segments of tech. So there is the short cadence, and for the short cadence, what we usually target is when you have a large pipeline. So this can be even relevant if you're trying to target the SMBs or the smaller markets. You'll probably be going for the short cadence because you have such a big pipeline that you want to put into your list and out of your list very quickly. So a typical short cadence is about 9 to 11 touches, and it lasts for just about 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, what we actually combine is a 3 email sequence, 1 LinkedIn request, 2 LinkedIn messages, and then 5 to 6 calls. Now, the way we combine that is that in order to get the good call-through rate, is the calls are actually follow-ups on the emails and the LinkedIn messages. And once we see that engagement and scoring coming through of people that have opened the email, have shown some sort of intent of engagement with that email, we actually schedule the cold calling, which is why the cold calling is not so much of a direct cold calling and comes through with a much higher success rate. The second type of cadence is probably the standard cadence. It lasts for about 3 weeks and includes probably about 13 to 15 touches. And that cadence is usually when you have, let's say, a medium-sized pipeline, so you don't have a lot of companies in your pipeline, but you do have a substantial amount of companies in your pipeline. It usually targets, like, if you're going for, I would say, the mid-market, probably not the enterprise. With the enterprise, you need to go a little bit longer, which I'm going to cover in a second. And that cadence also, if you notice, doesn't include a lot of emails. We're keeping it into 4 emails, but what we are doing is we're honing in more on the calls and adding, of course, the LinkedIn. And what's that doing is it actually helps you get through the gatekeepers, which is what happens a lot with mid-market firms, is that you might not get to the right person. So that's a cadence that's proven very successful when we are talking about mid-market firms. And then if you are going for the straight up enterprises, you really want to be going for a very, very long cadence. So you're looking at about 16 to 18 touches. It goes on for roughly about a month. We're looking at about 11 calls, 4 to 6 emails, and then the LinkedIn stay as is. The reason is that we don't want to be spamming people over LinkedIn. It's still a social network, and with social selling, we don't want to be overdoing it and abusing what the network is for, which is really like, to do knowledge sharing and gain valuable information. So what else can help you boost your outbound practices? So what you do want to pay close attention to is you want to be relevant. Okay, the more relevant you are, the more likely you are to get a response. And the way you do that is by also thinking about who your target market is. So different people respond good to different messaging. For example, if you're speaking with a technical person, they're much more likely to prefer case studies and information that makes sense to them in a methodological way. Whereas if you're talking to a creative person, they're probably going to prefer a video or a funny cartoon, which a lot of people use in outbound as well. Lastly, there is a big difference between how SMBs and how enterprises perceive outbound as well. So the SMBs, they would be much more keen to read longer content and actually get that content to make sense to them, whereas the enterprises, they're quite busy. So you need to be short and sweet to the point, and you really need to nail it in the first sentence. And the last thing you really want to do is you want to personalize. Now, to personalize, you actually don't have to do each outreach personally. We do that as well, and that can yield a very good response rate if you have specific people that you want to be reaching out for, but you can actually personalize via masses by targeting very specific areas of interest. For example, like, what is the financial metrics of the company? Have those specific companies shown a financial growth? How do those type of companies classify the pain? What lingo do they use? Who is the role? Like, you might have the same company that you're reaching out to a product person or a marketing person, and you will still be changing your outreach based on that title. And don't forget to test. I cannot stress how important testing is when it comes to outbound, because you want to be numbers driven. Essentially, we are in the numbers game. Even when it's outbound sales, and it is sales, you want to know how many opens do you get, how many replies do you get, what does the percentages look like, and where you need to optimize. Now, the way you do that is you become very methodological about your testing. So you don't test more than one thing at a time. And for example, if you are testing your subject line, then you're only testing your subject line. If you are testing your email copy or the first line of your email, you're testing that first line. Versus if you're only testing your CTA or the value proposition. So make sure that you only test one thing at a time, and you actually record those metrics so you know where you went wrong or where you went good. This is me. I hope I stuck with the L's 15 minutes. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. And thank you for coming back.
Maya, thank you so much. I want to say for a second, first of all, it was